Hi guys, it's Beth, and today I am back with my project share of all the cards I made from the fall portion of this fall and Halloween stack from Die Cuts with a View. So since the fall cards are finished, that means this project is finished. This pad is killed. And I got 273 cards just from the fall portion of this stack. It's a lot of cards. And I can honestly say that I am kind of ready to move on. But I do have this tray full of usable scraps, and I'm going to go through all of the cards, and I will put these on the inside, like cut them into fishtail banners, or just put the strips on the inside of the cards just to decorate them up a little bit. So most of that will still be used. And I'm going to go through these cards kind of quickly because there are a lot of cards and I don't want this video to be forever long. So if you have any questions, any more specific questions on any of the cards or the sketches that I talk about, please be sure just to let me know and I can answer those for you. And also just to give you a little idea of how I approached this portion of the project was with all the papers that I had left, I took all the full sheets that I had and decided which ones would make good mats for the card fronts and went ahead and cut those down into A2 size card mats. And then everything else I sorted kind of by size or by shape. So sorted all of my full sheets together, all of my strips together, all of my squares, rectangles together, and odd shapes, etc. And then I also went and sorted a lot of those by size, especially my strips. And you'll see why in a little bit. But it just made the process a lot easier and made me work a little more efficiently as I was working through all of this paper. The other thing I did is when I found a card sketch that I wanted to use, I used the heck out of it. So I made as many cards as I possibly could out of that one sketch. And I also didn't use a whole lot of different sentiments. I printed out a lot from my silhouette because I needed some bigger sentiments in a lot of cases. And I didn't have a lot of fall sentiments. And so I did ahead of time print and cut out a lot of those from my silhouette, and then I also in advance stamped a bunch of sentiments that I could use just so that with every card I didn't have to stop and stamp and come back. I could just kind of keep a production line going and get things put together a lot quicker. So all right, let's get into this. This sketch, it doesn't have a sketch number, but it's just from Robin's Craft Room. And I just went through and I made a bunch of these. I found a bunch of card mats, and then I had a bunch of strips that were pretty close to the size already. So whatever size I had is the piece I used down here. And so you can see not all of them are the same width. Like that one's a lot thinner. But just use whatever strips I could find that tied in with the backgrounds. Got a bunch of those made, and like I said, a lot of these circle sentiments came from my silhouette. I just printed them out and then punched them. This is one of the card sketches that I talk about all the time. It's Operation Write Home sketch number 154. And excuse me, I love it just because it uses up a bunch of squares. At the end of the project, I always have strips or small pieces that can be cut into squares, so I use this one all the time. And when I said that I went through and sorted all of my strips of scraps by width, that came in handy for this because anything that was like 2 inches or less I would cut down into squares and would put them on this card. So like in this case these squares are 1.5 inch, but in this case they are 2 inches, and so they 2 inches wide, so they didn't need any kind of matting behind them. It took up most of the card. So in this one, I just wanted to use the pumpkins. I thought they looked good on that orange plaid paper back there. So here's another one with the 2 inches. So I have a variety of different versions of these, based on the scraps I had. Some of them are all the same pattern, but most of them are mixed. And there was some red and green paper in this fall portion, so I actually got to make some Christmas cards, which was a really nice change of pace for this project. So I got tons out of that sketch. Reverse Confetti sketch number 25. I got a bunch of these. I got some Thanksgiving cards. This was a die cut that actually came out of this. It cut it in 2 pieces, with the center cut out. And so I used both so that I wasn't wasting anything, and made several Halloween or several Thanksgiving cards. And then I also used this sketch when I got to the Christmas portion of the red and greens. I had a lot of full sheets of the red and green, so I was able to really mass produce those, just cutting them down to the size I need, and got a bunch of them out of those full sheets, using some red and green cardstock as well. Freshly made sketches 226. I got tons of these, all these Christmas cards. And this is a Merry and Bright stamp that I have. And again, I stamped a whole bunch of them, some in green, some in black at the beginning of the project, and then just used them on all the cards. So I don't have a sketch for these, but it's a card layout that I use all the time just because it's a great way to use up some of these strips. And I originally got the idea from Christy Marcotte, who is also on YouTube, but again, was able to make a bunch of these at the end. I just saved all these at the end and then went through all the strips I had left. Again, resorted them by width so that I could find ones that were all the same, and then just cut them down to similar lengths. And then some of them are small like this, some of them are wider. There are a few that actually take up like a good portion of the card front. And in most cases, I just used a circle sentiment or image in the middle. That one I used more of like a banner. And in some of them, if I just used plain cardstock, then I went through and added some little circles that I had die cut out of some bigger die cut scraps that I had left. Again, some more of those circles. So a lot of different variations on these. This is a great way. You always have strips left. So great way to use up all those, all different kinds of themes and sentiments. So also using strips, I had some that were longer, and so I just used those. I kind of grouped them together, and then sometimes I kind of overlapped them at angles, and then used a strip of cardstock just to kind of tie them together to anchor it, and then put my sentiment on top. This one, they kind of took up more space, and this was a bigger sentiment, so I didn't put a strip behind that one. Same thing, some of them I cut into fishtail banners just for a little bit of variety. And then these were longer strips, so they almost made like a full card mat on the front. So again, a bunch of different ways to use up those strips that you always have left. This is My Favorite Things sketch 395, and I just took like one full sheet of this brown pattern paper and cut a bunch of die cut circles out of them. So the circle and for this background will be the same, but then the strip going across here changes each time based on what scraps I had available. So you can see different versions of those. And then also at the end, I had some of these scalloped tags left that I had used. I had cut them down for another card, and so I decided I could use those in the same way. Just put a sentiment going across the center there. And then these are vinyl leaves that I had cut out of some scrap vinyl. So as you can see, like if I could make several cards out of each sketch, then I did, just to kind of keep myself moving. This is the Sweetshop sketch number 117. And I had this stamp from Deep Red. It's their Harvest Sunflower stamp. And I love sunflowers, and at the time I made these, like I could look out my window and see all the sunflowers blooming in my garden. So I wanted to use these, especially because I liked how this dark red, almost like a barn red, and then this kind of darker yellow, which reminded me of the sunflowers. They looked really well together, and so I just I stamped my image and then did a real simple coloring with colored pencils and managed to layer a couple different colors of red to get that darker red to tie in with the paper. So I have a bunch of these. It just may vary. Like that one just varies with the, it's based on, didn't have a full sheet of red left, so I kind of pieced that one together. Another way, when you're using those strips and cutting them down into squares, I also cut a bunch into 1 1/4 inch size to go with this Mojo Monday sketch number 238. And this one calls for the sentiment to go kind of down here to the bottom left, but because I was using so many different colors and patterns, it kind of got lost down here, so I just put mine in the middle. But you can just see I tried to tie the patterns of the colors together as best I could, but then just kind of grouped them all on there. And this one, I had a lot of strips left of that, so got to do one full sheet, one full card of those little squares. And also there is this sketch, I think it's S&S sketch number 6. And it just calls for like some rectangles with a square image or element here in the center. And so I did the rectangles, but I did a circle sentiment since that's what I already had printed out. And then this one I actually turned horizontal. Same way with that one. And I did it, you know, some were all in the same. Some, it depended on how much I had of each color. More of that green leaf. So this also just shows you some different ways that you can use the same sketch. And on these, I didn't have a sketch, but I just kind of did a real simple card front. And I thought this brown and kind of like brown and dark red herringbone pattern like made a good manly card. So with just the simple card layout, I felt it would make a good masculine birthday card. So I followed like the same layout with this one, just without the circle, and I just did my sentiment across that strip there and added some leaves that I had stamped out and colored that tied in. So I was able to use up a good portion of that paper just with those cards. And then this is the card that I had originally cut those scalloped labels out of. When I was going through all of my silhouette images at the beginning of this whole project to see like what I might be able to use or just to get some inspiration, I saw this Give Thanks jar, and I love mason jars, so I knew I wanted to use it somehow. So I had seen where somebody had used a jar element on a scalloped label background like this. But once I put it on there, I realized it needed a little bit of something else to kind of weight it down. So I brought in some more brown with just the strip that went across the middle there. And like I said, I got a bunch of those. Some of them are a different pattern. And also from my silhouette, I thought these are really cute. They are pumpkin shaped cards and kind of have like a patchwork feel to it with the different patterns working together there. And it opens up and you can put your message on the inside. So that was cute. So I got a bunch of those. And these kind of made it quick and easy. You know, my silhouette already cuts everything out for me, so all I have to do is layer them up and glue them on. So I did a bunch of different silhouette cards. Like this one is also a silhouette card project. And it actually called for like a quilt pattern to go over this leaf shape. Like, so you would do a solid colored cardstock for the leaf, and then the pattern paper would be layered over it. But to be honest, I was trying to get through these quickly, so I liked the primitive kind of folky shape of the leaf by itself. So I just took one sheet and cut out as many leaves as I could out of one sheet, and then as many of these diamonds out of the stripes that I could out of one sheet, and got about 5 cards. And also from the silhouette, it didn't use a ton of my pattern paper, but I thought they were really cute, and I thought they would make like really good Thanksgiving or fall type note cards. It's just this white scalloped label, again with some holes, you know, stitched holes kind of around the edge, and then the pumpkin cut out of the middle. So I took several sheets of white cardstock and cut out all of these scalloped labels. And then I think it's like 3 by 3.5 maybe pieces of pattern paper that I used to go behind that opening of the pumpkin. So I mean, it did use up a decent amount of paper, probably at least a sheet or two of different, I've got several different patterns going on in here. But I just thought those were really cute. So I knew I'd wanted to do those. And now I have a bunch of white pumpkins that I can color up and use for other projects as well. This is sketch number 136 by Operation Right Home. And I left out this bottom strip on this card sketch just because my elements were all bigger and I didn't have room at the end when I was done. So here I was trying to use up some die cut pumpkins that I had out of this pattern paper. When I was cutting some of these other items out of my silhouette, if I had any small pieces of unused paper like left on that sheet of paper that I was running through my silhouette, I would fill it with some, you know, small pumpkin or a leaf or just something just to use up that paper. So that's a great and quick way to make sure you can use up your scraps with something other than just strips or circles. You can go ahead, and if you're cutting other things out on your silhouette or your Cricut or your scan and cut or whatever, go ahead and fill your empty space with some small shaped items, even if it's just a fishtail banner that you can use on a card. It at least makes it a little bit quicker for you to get through all of those little scraps that you're going to have left. So I have two of these. Like, these three were kind of medium-sized pumpkins. These are larger, and so I could only fit two on that one. And I just backed them with some stitch rectangle dies. On this one I had to piece two pieces together to get my card mat, so I covered that seam there with the craft. And again, was staring at my sunflowers one day and decided to use up some of these paper sunflowers I had in my stash, and I liked how this green and yellow popped off of each other, so I did that with sunflowers and then just added a little happy birthday tag sentiment there. This is Sweet Sunday, sketch number 220. And I have a stamp set by Lawn Fawn. It's pumpkin spice. And it's just got, you know, the latte cup and then a sentiment and just your latte condiments and smiley faces. And so I stamped the mug and colored it in with my colored pencils. And then I used my Misty to stamp the sentiment down here because I did "You're the" and "In my latte" in brown, and then went back and did the pumpkin spice in orange. So I liked the two-tone color of the sentiment. So I did a couple versions of those, and then I had some leaves that I had stamped out of the pattern paper and fussy cut out. So I just used that as the decoration on the mug. And then I have a Brutus Monroe stamp set. It's called Got Pumpkin. It's got this coffee cup and then the pumpkin in the middle. And so I stamped it out several different times, once on white cardstock and then on two different pattern papers, and then fussy cut everything out so that I could layer it together to get me a fall pumpkin cup. And then one last version of this was just a thinking of you, and so I didn't really have anything else, any other elements that I wanted to use out of what I'd already stamped or cut, so I just pulled some paper flowers out of my stash that tied in with the yellow and the cream. This is Freshly Made Sketches 207, and it's just a bunch of different sized rectangles grouped together. And so I have several versions of these based on the scraps I had left. And then on some of these where the sentiment didn't take up as much space, I just filled it with some flowers, or in this case some hearts, just to give it a little bit more. And this is sketch number 178 by Sweet Sunday. And I just went through again and took a sheet of pattern paper and cut a bunch of circles out of it. And then these leaves, actually, I originally cut out of green cardstock to go on the pumpkin shaped cards, but I didn't really like the way the green tied in with all the pattern papers. And so I cut some new green ones, like in a different shade. So I wanted to use these up as well. So I just used those and layered them with another paper flower and Brad from my stash. And then another version, I had this cornucopia die cut in my stash. And I mean, it was actually like pretty long. It came up and curved around, and so I cut it off just so it fit in the circle. And I wanted to use it up, and I felt the colors tied for the most part, so made a Thanksgiving card out of that one. And then this one I just did a Happy Fall sentiment from my silhouette. This one was really fun. When I was looking through my silhouette, I had found these trees, just kind of like simple tree shapes. So when I was cutting some other stuff out, it was actually from these cards. Like behind this, there's like a spot in this diamond where you'll see like there's a tree hole, like the shape of a tree cut out. So I just tried to kind of maximize my paper use there. But so I cut out two different patterns. In most cases, it depended on, some of them have the same pattern for both, same shape for both. But I just used like the aqua blue pattern paper kind of as a sky background, and then some green cardstock down here at the bottom, and then divided them just with a thin brown strip of cardstock just to break it up a little bit, and then layered my trees and then a simple hello sentiment. So those were fun. I thought those were cute and fun to do. This is MF My Favorite Things sketch number 327. And again, I just went through, took a whole sheet of this yellow pattern paper and cut them down into these like fishtail banners, and then did the same thing with went ahead and cut out all the brown. So those two pieces are the same on every card, as is the sentiment, I believe, but the strip here and this little tab up at the top, and then the strip that goes across the back, all vary depending on what strips I had available of my scraps. And they have their tab going like up, but I made mine a little bit bigger, so I didn't have as much room. But I also felt that this yellow, like all of the color was down here at the bottom, and so I wanted to kind of bring it in a little bit. It was too heavily weighted at the bottom, so I wanted to balance it out, and so I had my tab kind of coming down on the yellow up here. This is Sweet Sunday sketch number 239, and I had made some skunk cards, that I had showed in one of my previous videos, and I used this red and black on the background. And so I loved how they played off of each other and how they popped off each other. So I knew with the sheets that I had left that I wanted to use those together again. And so with this sketch, I felt with the red, like I needed something to break up the red, or just to give it a little bit more pizzazz or something fun to look at. And so from my silhouette, I print out this graduation hat with the congrats for a big element there in the middle. I made a bunch of those. And using up some strips of the green pattern paper, I used this Mojo Monday sketch number 444. A couple different versions of that. And then this sketch, I don't have any information on it, but it's just basically some rectangles, different sizes of rectangles, and they've, got a strip that goes across the middle to tie them all together. So I just picked some coordinating papers and made several of those. This is another fun way to use up your squares, or if you cut your strips down into squares. This top card is 1 1/4 inch squares, and these two cards are 1 inch squares. And so I went through with my pen or my marker and just added some stitch detail just to kind of tie it all together, since they were all kinds of colors. And then I added a thank you, a fall thank you sentiment that I printed out from my silhouette as well. This is a new sketch that I tried this time, and it's Sunday sketch 12/28/14. And like I said, I had a bunch of little circles that I was trying to use up. So it's kind of a simple card, But again, a way to use up some of those strips that I had, as well as some of those little circles. And then this is Sketch SC 355, and a couple different versions of this, just using up mostly the same patterns, just I had a bunch of pieces that were similar sizes, so. When I was going through my embellishments for fall, I found a bunch of tags that I had made a long time ago, and wanted to go ahead and try and use them because the colors tied in, like the oranges tied into the paper that was in the fall portion of the stack. So I used My Favorite Things sketch number 194, kind of a version of it. And like I made one card with one circle in the background, like a bigger circle, but then I didn't have a whole lot of this green, this shade of green left. So I was able to get one big circle and one smaller circle, so I just layered it with another smaller brown circle. And this particular tag had a little pocket, so I just stamped a couple of sentiments, like thank you and so sweet, and then went in with my stub quarter rounder, or corner chomper, and cut all the corners, and then took a pen and outlined the edges just to make it stand out a little bit. Have those tucked in there. And then at the end, like after those two, I didn't have enough of the green to do circles, so I just did some rectangle strips and then layered this tag on there as well. So that was nice to use up some really old stash. And then I used this sketch, there's no number, but it just says Happy Incan Thursday Blog Hop, August 17. So I did one version of it just like the sketches where it's horizontal, but I had to, it needed a little something on the corners here, so I just added some flowers layered with some little punched circles as my flower centers. And then I did a vertical version as well. And again, I had a bunch of these pumpkins that pumpkins and leaves that I had stamped and then fussy cut out of the pattern paper. So I wanted to get those used up. So did some Hey Pumpkin cards. And then more strips. And this is Operation Right Home, sketch number 143. And it just uses a bunch of thin but long strips that can go diagonally across your card. So since I had my strips sorted by width, I found 4 that were like very similar in size, and so I just grouped those together going across. And then instead of doing my sentiment on a strip or somewhere else, I just left enough room in between my strips and stamped my sentiment directly on the card. So this one was a little bit wider strips, but again, I stamped my sentiment in between. So that was a new one. That one was fun to use as well. This is Operation Right Home, sketch number 236. Again, that red and black combination. And this time it's just a banner, and then I added used my congrats sentiment as my circle element. Sweetshop, sketch number 78. Again, that red and black, but I used a different sentiment this time. Like I didn't have a lot of big sentiments, and I didn't have any pattern paper that I thought would look good like as a focal point here. And so I used my silhouette to cut out this Mr. and Mrs. or print out, excuse me, this Mr. and Mrs. Happily Ever After sentiment. So love that red and black together for some reason. This is My Favorite Things, sketch 367. And again, I had some of these barn images that I had stamped and colored. And then I had some strips left of that red and yellow, but they were vertical. So I just changed it up and pieced those together using a piece of white cardstock to tie them together in the middle there. This is Operation Right Home sketch number 57. And again, it's just a different version of the different sizes of rectangles. Theirs was horizontal, but I turned mine vertically just because of the image, the stamped sentiments that I already had. This is My Favorite Things sketch 265. And I have one vertical version and that kind of matches this layout. And then I also did a horizontal version and just used, it's an owl that I had in my stash and thank you sentiment that I outlined. Reverse Confetti sketch number 27, and just group together some scraps of that leaf pattern paper, and then this Leaves Are Falling, Autumn is Calling is also a sentiment from my silhouette. Mojo Monday sketch number 378, and I had the squirrel, a couple squirrels that were die cut and in my stash, and so I just layered those up. Very cute fall card. I used a version of this Sunday sketch January, or it's like 01/27/2013, so I'm sure it's the date when it was released, but I separated out my circles instead of grouping them together, and then I just put the sentiment kind of wherever it looked best. It was different for each of those cards. Another new sketch that I tried this time was the Sunday sketch 090113, and I just liked it because it was the fishtail banners. And again, this is something good, like if you have your strips, you can find the ones that are similar in width. Like this card, I think they are like 1 1/8 inch wide across the top, and then in this card they're a little smaller. They're 1 inch or just shy of 1 inch, somewhere along there. But then instead of putting my sentiment on a piece of cardstock, I just stamped it, just filled that white space and stamped it directly on my card in both of those cases. That was another fun one. This is Stampler Ations challenge sketch number 4. And again, I turned it horizontal instead of vertical because my images were too big to go the other way. These were just some images that I had stamped out and colored and then fussy cut, and then same with the pumpkin, I just did it on some pattern paper. And then this Happy Thanksgiving sentiment is stamped on a rectangle that's like a stitched rectangle from a stitched rectangle die. And then after the fact, after I put it on, I realized it needed a little something to kind of anchor it down. And so I just added some vellum, or not vellum, excuse me, vinyl dots that I had cut out of some scraps of vinyl already. And then another version of that, using up some of those die cut pumpkins. This one just uses up some different strips as well. It's Sunday Stamp Sketch 140, and I just used the strips grouped fairly closely together as my mat for my sentiment on the front. And here's My Favorite Things sketch 114. Like there's one that kind of matches the sketch pretty closely, and then this one, I had my silhouette messed up on me a couple times trying to cut these scalloped labels, and so I had some where half the label was messed up or most of the label was messed up. So I salvaged what I could, cutting some other shapes out of the centers, but this one actually looked good on 1/2. So I just cut it in half and then used that as my circle element. And here is Freshly Made Sketches number 83. Just some different sized rectangles layered together. And then just felt it needed something. So I added the circles there and then the little tab up there at the top. And this is the last of the red and black paper, using the Operation Right Home sketch number 32. And since I didn't have any pattern paper as a card mat, I just made my strip go all the way across instead of, you know, just in the center. I made it go all the way across. And then again, added that graduation hat sentiment in the center. And then here are some other like one-off sketches, like where I made one card per sketch. But this is Mojo Monday sketch 383. And just layered a bunch of different rectangles and banners, and then it needed something up here in the corner. And so since I had thanks a bunch, I added a flower to go along with that. This is CPS 217. This is one I use a lot. You know, just real simple. Operation Right Home, sketch number 106. And I just changed it up. Like I made my strip here have a fishtail at the bottom, and I believe they called for another piece of a strip of pattern paper on the side, and I just left it with my craft cardstock, but then broke up that line there with some pattern circles, pattern paper, circle die cuts. And this doesn't have a number, but it's a sketch created by Pamela Young. Again, just another way to use some different sizes of rectangles and squares. This is Sunday sketch 081014. And this just uses up some different sizes of those strips. So use some of those and one of the pumpkins that I had stamped and fussy cut. Here again, another version of a sketch using strips, and it's Jenny Fur torn paper blogspot, tornpaper.blogspot.com. And I got to the point where I was out of off-white paper that was like this lighter cream, and so I just started stamping directly on that ledger paper for my sentiments. So I figured that would tie in better than my darker cream colored cardstock. Here is sketch SSD 92. Just again, another way to use up. I had a lot of those strips to use up. So a different way to use up all of those strips. This is Sweet Sunday sketch 264. And I just, since I didn't have any background paper, again, just broke up the white cardstock with some red cardstock circles at the bottom. This is Sweet Sunday sketch number 176. Again, using up strips of that leaf paper. My leaves are falling, autumn is calling sentiment from the silhouette. And then these are just kind of some random ones where I didn't have a sketch. I was just trying to use up some of the scraps that I had left at the end. So again, I just pieced these two together to make my card mat, using that white piece of cardstock to tie them together. I had this sentiment, hope all is merry and bright, already stamped in my stash, and then just added a little bit, some red dots up at the top to break that up. And this one I had a season's greetings as well. I had a couple pieces that were big enough to do a full A2 size card mat, so 4 1/4, 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and made my mat out of that, and then just backed my leaves are falling sentiment on some brown cardstock, and then did two different size strips of brown down here just to break that up. And this tree paper I had originally shown you in my Halloween card share. There were a few portions of it that had some like this light yellow where the sun set, you know, the sun was going down. And so it tied in with this light yellow that was in the fall portion of the stack. So I just did every year I fall for autumn leaves, apple cider, hay rides, pumpkin spice, and you. And then kind of evened it out with some fussy cut leaves that I had stamped out of some light yellow paper. This tree, the forest paper, I also showed you, I had made some cards in a previous video where I used this sentiment, may the forest be with you, and all I had left were like these strips. And so just to be different, instead of grouping them in the middle, I had them coming from alternate sides, and then did a fishtail banner like on the ends just to give it a little bit of something. Again, trying to use up those die cut pumpkins, and these were larger, so I just put the pumpkins on one side, Evened it out with a strip of paper over here on the other side in my sentiment. A couple of versions of that. And last, in my stash, I had this piece of vellum with this autumn saying, and again, was also trying to use up some of my old stash in this project. So I took my stitched rectangle die and cut out the vellum, and then also cut out a frame, and then they're both backed like with some foam just to raise it up a little bit. And then I had some leaves that I had stamped and colored in that kind of tied in with this brown and red herringbone paper. So I just embellished the corners of the frame with that. 273 cards, guys. There you have it. So thanks for sticking with me through this long video. And I am going to be doing my full project wrap up here in another day or two. So that will totally wind up this project. Hopefully you guys got some ideas out of this video, especially on how to use up those smaller scraps. So if you did, give me a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe, because there are many more ideas to come. But thanks again for your time today, guys. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.